Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my channel, The Jazz Shepherd. This is on the great Hank Mobley, one of my favorite players in the jazz canon. He's an institution at Blue Note, as we discussed in episode 1. And here we're going to see just how broad his career influences those around him and how many people he contributed to on their records. As we mentioned in episode 1, initially, Lee Morgan and Donald Byrd are kind of linked to the hip with Mobley. One or the other is almost always on his records, with Art Farmer being an exception on a few, and Kenny Dorham, I guess, is on 1 or 2 as well. But he loves to work with Mobley, with Morgan, I mean, and a lot of his most fiery stuff is with Morgan. And he also loves to work with Byrd, and I think him and Byrd have a real soulful blues connection. And Mobley was really at home playing the blues, and he was also really at home playing stuff he composed and arranged. He was a great composer and a great arranger. We're going to jump into his late 50s Blue Note catalog. Here's a record he does, 1540, Hank Mobley with Donald Byrd and Lee Morgan. I'll give you a little close-up of that. This is a lovely Japanese pressing. You can see Byrd there on the end. You can barely see Hank here under that. And there's young Lee Morgan there. These three became three of the real lions of the hard bop subgenre of jazz. Can't recommend these records enough. I think most of you are going to be fairly familiar with this stuff if you're big jazz guys. What we're listening to right now is 1547, if I recall. And it's, of course, another Hank Mobley all-star record. And this is a later 70s blue pressing, but it's with Milt Jackson, Horace Silver, Doug Watkins, and Art Blakey. And Milt, of course, was on Atlantic by this point. Beautiful stuff. Great picture of the young Hank Mobley. 1550, again, Art Farmer returns to work with Hank. Another Japanese pressing of a Mobley record. Often that's where I can find them in my price range. Mobley, Silver, Farmer, Watkins, and Blakey. And so there's Blakey once again working with his alumnus and happily contributing to their careers and saying, you know what, I've kicked you out of my group to go do your own thing, but I'll still help you out in your sessions at any time. And that's one of the most important things about jazz. And one of the reasons why I enjoy sorting my records by jazz label is because, in a way, the label becomes the band. It's a loose knit conglomeration of musicians, and at any given time I can work with anyone in this label stable. And the Blue Note stable is incredible, and as I mentioned in a video last week, a lot of them are pretty unknown names on a national record sale, going to a record store kind of. People didn't know these people. They're unknown, and their sales were very limited. This is one of the most sought after records on the Blue Note canon. 1568, Hank Mobley with Bill Harbin, Curtis Potter, Sonny Clark, Paul Chambers, and Art Taylor. This is a classic record reissue. Great picture of young Hank. I don't know why he's got sunglasses on in the studio. Maybe he was a little bit cheaped up at the time. Classic, of course, does a great job with the covers, giving them that beautiful shine that the originals had, and nice heavy pressings with decent, great sound quality, really. Great stuff. Another real classic Mobley record, 1560, Hank, that's all it was called. And we got Bobby Timmons at a young age, another jazz messenger guy, John Jenkins from Chicago, Donald Byrd's on the trumpet, Wilbur Ware on the bass, and Philly Joe Jones on the drums. I forgot he was on that. Another classic record reissue. Classic Records was pretty good about putting Mobley and Morgan's stuff out there because the demand was pretty high for it at that point. Then the last of his late 50s records is Peck in Time. Classic Reed Miles. Just a case. Let's say it's a case for a reel-to-reel tape, probably. I'm not sure exactly who's on this one. Lee Morgan, Hank Mobley, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Charlie Person. So that's some pretty important records he made there, all in the hard bop idiom. And of course, he collaborates with most of the other greats of this new thing called hard bop. And it's fairly different from all the jazz that came before. It was so grooving. It didn't allow the virtuosity of bebop to deter from the groove and the blues. And of course, Horace Silver and Art Blakey are kind of the innovators there that really drove that home. But Mobley's work there is all important and classic part of the jazz canon. We're going to take a look now at a couple of things he does here. In '59, he does these 2 sessions that ended up on Roulette. They're live recordings from the Birdland Club. And of course, Billy Rutt is on there. Curtis Fuller, another guy he works with, a lot of trombone player. And of course, Lee Morgan is at his side once again. And you get the feeling that Lee Morgan and Hank hung on a lot together. Probably smoked a lot of joints together. Probably shared a lot of communion together. Probably even passed a couple chicks back and forth. They seem like they're pretty fast and tight. And I think Mobley probably liked Morgan's personality because it gave an edge to him that he didn't really have. And I think Morgan probably liked having Mobley's softening around him. They seem very interlinked as people as well as players. In '59, he rejoins the Messengers for these At the Jazz Corner of the World records with Bobby Timmons, Lee Morgan, Jamie Merritt, and Art Blakey. Great stuff. I somehow missed these in my Jazz Messenger series. I couldn't believe I did that. In part because there's a lot of these little live 2-session records by the Jazz Messengers, and a lot of them are kind of named similarly, but still, I can't believe I missed those. Here's one of Lee Morgan's early records on Blue Note. Hank Mobley's at his side. That's a great record, another classic record. Another classic record here is the Johnny Griffin, I think it was just self-titled, I think they call it a Blowing Session now or something like that. Beautiful cover, the birds flying. Griffin was, of course, the little giant of jazz, a small, probably 5'5", 5'6" brother who was incredibly dexterous. He could fly through the saxophone at a really great tempo without sacrificing melody, and that's always an important measuring stick of how great your ability is. Speed and virtuosity needs to be tempered by melodic phrasing and true rhythmic structure. You need to fit within the template that's laid out for you. And to me, when you wander too far away from that, it becomes more challenging for the listener and it becomes self-indulgent for the player. Curtis Fuller, who we mentioned a minute ago, the great trombone player, next to J.J. Johnson, probably one of the great hard bop trombone players there was. This is a great record of his, another original pressing. I was thrilled when I found this in a record store probably 15 years ago. And it's one of those records that once you get past Monk, Miles, Coltrane, and a few of the big names that you know as a young jazz collector, when you start collecting just any Blue Note, that's a wormhole. And once you go down that, it's hard to get out of it. Here's another record he does with Curtis Fuller. This time it's on United Artists from '59. But again, we're looking at Lee Morgan, Hank Mobley, Curtis Fuller, all Jazz Messenger alumnus, with the great Tommy Flanagan on piano, Paul Chambers, and Elvin Jones. And Elvin Jones and Mobley seem to have a mutual link at some point, because he does some records for Elvin Jones later in the '60s that are kind of anomalous. In '59, I believe these come out, maybe '58. No, it's probably '57 even. 2 live records with Jimmy Smith, and again the band: Lou Donaldson, Donald Byrd, Hank Mobley, Eddie McFadden on guitar, who I love. Any Jimmy Smith record with Eddie McFadden on, it's worth jamming out to. McFadden's a great rhythm player. And of course, the young Art Blakey. And again, I think we look at these now and go, what a bunch of talent they assimilated. But a lot of these names were fairly unknown. And they've just become legends, in part because Blue Note allowed them to do their thing. Sonny Clark, this is a record I love. I love all Sonny Clark's Blue Note stuff. Curtis Fuller, Art Farmer, Hank Mobley, Wilbur Ware, and Louis Hayes. Doing this video set series, I've been surprised to see how much Art Farmer and Hank Mobley show up together. That's at least the fourth or fifth time, and I didn't think they worked that much together. Very simpatico, those two guys. This is a Kenny Burrell record. It was a session that was recorded in 58 or 59. Was never issued. Came out much later in Japan, of course, with Doug Watkins, Horace Silver, and Louis Hayes. That lineup was probably even 56. This was recorded. I was happy when I found that in Chicago. Great stuff. The great Dizzy Reese, fiery player out of England. Hank Mobley shows up on this Blue Note. So you can see how much Blue Note stuff Hank's a part of. He's always willing to step in and be like, I'll donate my day and my time. And of course, it's always nice to make that money. We see a lot of stuff there, almost all on Blue Note, with the exception of those two roulette records. He does a few things outside of the Blue Note stable in the late 50s, and it's great stuff. This Kenny Drew record, it's the only time I find Hank to be on Riverside. And Riverside is a great label, of course, also from New York. And this has Donald Byrd on it, Kenny Drew, Wilbur Ware, of course Mobley, and a J.T. Hogan on the drums. But it's not something you see very much of, was Mobley going outside of the studios of Blue Note to record for other people. And then he also worked with Max Roach. And we saw that debut on the last record session on the little debut label where he worked with Max. He comes back to work with Max twice more in the late 50s. One on this Max Roach 4 plays Charlie Parker. This is with Kenny Dorham, Hank Mobley, and Nelson Boyd. It's a great record. Hard to find. I love old Emerson Mercury stuff. And then the Chicago label Argo has this Max Roach record where Mobley's also a member of. And I don't remember who else is on this session. George Morrow, Ramsey Lewis, and Kenny Dorham. That's fantastic. Interesting thing, for some reason, my copy of this record has the back sleeve stuck on backwards, upside down. So anyway, that wraps up my late 50s Hank Mobley. I, of course, wore Michael Jordan because Hank being the middleweight champion, there's no way that Michael wasn't the middleweight champion of basketball, and in many ways all team sports. Anyway, I'm the Jazz Shepherd. I appreciate y'all for watching. Tune in for episode 3 and Hank Mobley coming soon. Appreciate y'all. Subscribe to my channel. Peace.
Mm-hmm.